All right, everybody, welcome to Decentral. I'm Freddie and Cameron.
Yo.
Cameron says yo. And we got the gang here. We got Zach here from Ares and a bunch of other people that we'll say hello to in a second. But first, I just want to say thank you to Airbits for being an amazing sponsor. And their wallet is due for some new updates soon, which everybody should stand by for. They're going to be amazing. I'm really excited about this because there are a couple of beefs I had with the app that now are being addressed, and I'm very, very excited and proud to say it's going to be an amazing piece of software soon. Okay, enough of that, and now we're back here in the studio. Okay, so we got Chelsea's in the house. Yeah, we got Peter. We got that handsome motherfucker over there dressed up, and Chico and Zach, and then Mr. Athletic is here too. Kevin. Jesse. Oh, and Yuri's over there, but people can't see him because he's playing shy. Oh, you got to be a little bit closer, Yuri. Say hi. So Yuri's got a new exchange called Taurus. Brand new exchange here in Vancouver.
Taurus.
So our guests here, we have Joe from Jay. Is that Jay? Sorry, Jay. He looks like an O. Fuck, I'm so stupid.
It does look like an O from here.
Yeah, it does. Cause I'm half blind in my both eyes. So and this is Ethan, and Ethan is. You're also Ares as well? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Where's Jay from, Freddie?
Jay's from Tendermint, right? Tendermint?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so Ethan is from Tendermint and Ares, correct?
Yep.
All right. So who wants to lead us and tell us what Tendermint is, please?
Sure, I'll lead off. Tendermint is a blockchain stack. It is originally designed to compete with Bitcoin as a public consensus blockchain ledger. And now it's evolving to work in both the public and private blockchain space. And so it's a lot of things, and how it evolves is to be determined. But what Tendermint, the code base is it's a foundation for us to start building all of these things on top. Ethan, you want to just chime in and we can go?
Yeah, sure. Cool. So Tendermint is a proof of stake based protocol, which is to say that instead of the people validating and securing the network having to throw away huge swaths of electricity just to prove they're not malicious, we instead invoke the very reasonable assumption that we can hold people accountable, and that it's better, in fact, to be able to identify not necessarily exactly the person, but where the mining is happening, and sort of hold people to their role in the network. So in the sense that on the Bitcoin network, basically anything goes, and history could be rewritten at any moment by anyone that is able to bring more work onto the network. So you could come out of nowhere, all of a sudden turn on a bunch of ASICs, and bam, you're taking over the Bitcoin network, and no one knows where you came from. Whereas in a proof-of-stake scenario, to be someone who's able to mint blocks and to update the ledger, you have to be sort of a registered identity, not necessarily in the real world. I mean, there's the possibility for anonymity, but on the network itself, so that you can't just sort of come out of nowhere with a huge amount of hashing power that no one would ever be able to track down and just take over and then throw it away. In fact, you have to put up a security deposit so that you have something at stake, so that if you're found to be malicious, you're actually going to lose that, right? So these proof-of-stake-based protocols, of which Tendermint is really, I believe, the first implementation of not proof-of-stake in general, but of this sort of version of proof-of-stake where something is at stake in the form of a security deposit, and that's sort of to make it more reliable and to align the incentives a little better than sort of Bitcoin has been able to do with centralization effects of mining pools and the actual security problems of proof-of-work mining.
And just to add to that, there have been other proof-of-stake blockchain protocols or stacks that came before Tendermint, such as NXT or BitShares. Tendermint was the first one to actually implement what some would call a traditionally Byzantine fault-tolerant algorithm, so something inspired by the work in BFT algorithms that have been done in academia and that have been around since 1980. So one of the inspirations for the protocol was a Byzantine fault-tolerant algorithm created by Dwork, Lynch, and Stockmayer. And sometimes it's called the DLS protocol, DLS, published in 1988. When I read that paper, that's when the light bulb, flashed and everything started to click, and I realized that we can solve this with without proof of work.
Yeah, cool. So I think you were initially, Jay, you were working on like a Bitcoin exchange, right? And you got so fed up with the mechanics of blocks being able to be reverted and having to deal with reorganizations that sort of set you off this proof of stake path.
Yeah, definitely that was one factor. That was a major factor. Right before Tendermint, I've been working on this crypto-to-crypto exchange called, it was called Fort Knox, FTNOX, and it was supposed to be a crypto-to-crypto exchange. And one of the problems I had implementing it was dealing with the fact that different blockchains, like proof-of-work blockchains like Bitcoin and Dogecoin or Litecoin, that these things fork all the time. And every time it forks, you need to undo certain things, and you have to make sure that people don't withdraw their coins until there's enough confirmations. And it's not really clear what the best way to, how best to determine when that moment is. And that's when I realized that there's something not wrong, but something that makes it not easy for developers to use Tendermint. I mean, not Tendermint, Bitcoin, and all proof of work algorithms. So in designing Tendermint, the first thing we did was we designed this framework where you post collateral on the blockchain, and in order to fork the blockchain, you let's see. So if you require at every block, if you require that every block requires a quorum, in other words, 2/3 or more of signatures, then to have a fork of the blockchain would mean that at least 1/3 of these validators had double signed, and you can determine who those double signers are, and you can slash their collateral. So that framework was the first thing that was implemented, and the nice thing about that is that the blockchain should never fork. Forking would be a catastrophic event that should rarely happen, and what that means is that when developers such as exchange developers developing on top of such a consensus protocol or a cryptocurrency stack, they don't necessarily have to worry about the forking aspect of it.
Okay. Where does the collateral come from? Is there actually tokens out of the Tender blockchain? Is that where it comes from?
Yep.
Yeah, so the way it's implemented, there is a coin that's inside the Tendermint blockchain, and those are the coins that users can bond, and bonding is just a transaction. It's like sending it to a special address, right? And so if you bond the coin that's within the blockchain, then you can become a validator. And of course, the other validators who are already validators need to approve of that transaction. So some people call this a permissioned network. So yeah, in some ways, Tendermint is a permissioned network. But it doesn't have to be the case that collateral is posted with coins on the blockchain. So in a private financial institutional setting, such as with a consortium of banks, all these banks, they don't need to necessarily have coins on the blockchain. They could have collateral that's an escrow literally at Fort Knox or somewhere else, or it could be on other blockchains too. It can be anything.
Right.
Okay.
Peter's got a question.
So how would you track collateral that's not on the blockchain?
Mm-hmm. So going back to the example with, say, a coalition of banks, right? Or maybe banks are kind of too big, so let's think, it'll be easier to think about in terms of, say, a coalition of validators. Let's say tomorrow Tendermint has a crowdfunding sale, and anybody who pays $5,000, say, as collateral can become part of our network. And let's say we have 300 of these people, right? The $500, all of that money, 500 times 300, can go into an escrow account. That can go into a bank account, or you can offload it to somebody who is responsible, or or you can divide it up amongst a set of escrow accounts. And by escrow account, I mean things that are external to the blockchain. And then each of these 300 validators would have public-private key pairs, so they're pseudonymous, and you can have a legal contract that's enforced by a legal entity, which are the escrows, that basically that says that if any of the validators do something bad that causes a fork in the blockchain, say that the collateral gets slashed, or it gets destroyed, or in the case of real-world assets, we wouldn't really destroy it. That wouldn't really make sense. Maybe instead what we would do is we would make sure that those funds get spent to make the victims of the attack whole again.
Interesting.
Okay. Can you limit who can have access to those tokens to comply with, say, regulations on securities and so on and so on?
Sure, of course. If you were running a private chain, and even potentially in a public chain, depending on how you wanted, what the characteristics of the public chain you wanted to be. Basically, Tendermint allows a spectrum, right? It's a platform for building blockchains, and you can sort of adjust what level of decentralization or permissionedness you really want in there. At any rate, there's always going to be some amount of permissioning, just based on the fact that it's a proof of stake based system where you have to bond collateral, and the previously bonded individuals have to accept the new bonds, right? So if you want to come in as like a new validator, the current set of validators has to accept you, right? But in an ecosystem of such chains, there are external pressures, sort of market competition pressures, that should, in theory, help with the issue of censorship, right? I mean, the interesting thing about proof of stake compared to proof of work is that proof of work is really much taken for granted as like these truly censorship-resistant publication platforms. That's what they're really good for. But they're going to fork all the time. So if you're trying to track a currency on them, it can be a little bit frustrating. Whereas in proof of stake land, we pretty much solve the forking problem with these bonds that get slashed, right? And we could, using the legal system, enforce it to be assets in the real world held in escrow, like Jay was talking about. But it does sort of present a little bit of a censorship problem. And so on the one hand, it's okay because we want organizations and coalitions of organizations to run their own blockchains to provide services on top of, but that also have the benefits of the cryptographic verifiability that come with blockchains. But at the same time, in a larger ecosystem of these things, if one is found to start censoring, people will start moving to another one. I mean, we see this happening on Reddit even, where like if a particular subreddit is found to be censoring, they'll all just leave and go to another one, right? Or Reddit itself is found to be censoring, so people started moving to vote. So the same kind of mechanic we would expect to apply in an ecosystem of proof-of-stake blockchains to sort of help with that censorship. But the point is, you have the whole spectrum, and it's up to you, right?
Okay.
Interesting. Cameron?
So I noticed you're using what's called the Byzantine fault tolerance algorithm. Did this algorithm exist before Bitcoin, and was Tendermint possible before Bitcoin, or is this something only possible because of Bitcoin?
Yeah, I have something written down. Let me read this. Okay, so yeah, BFT algorithms have been around since the 80s and even earlier, but none were really designed for financial transactions, as far as I know. At least none that are publicly implemented or where there was a white paper on. They weren't really designed, or at least the white papers weren't really written for the sake of like handling financial transactions, with the exception of a few, such as like PBFT. PBFT was published before Bitcoin, Nakamoto's white paper, and it was designed for a file system, or at least that was what was implemented with it. And so, yeah, certainly we had the capability to create a classically Byzantine fault-tolerant blockchain even before Bitcoin. The reason why we hadn't seen it is probably because it's more difficult to implement and even to understand. Bitcoin's Nakamoto consensus is rather easier to understand and to kind of reason about. It's also easier to implement because all you need to do is publish a hash. There's no need to communicate a bunch of signatures and count quorums and things like that. Another thing is that until recently, with advances in public-private key cryptography, it wasn't really possible to have a lot of validators, say like 1,000 validators who are all communicating to each other their signatures. It would have made any blockchain pretty slow. So, like in the 90s, for example, nobody would have really considered creating a massively decentralized Byzantine fault-tolerant blockchain because it would have seemed infeasible. But today we have the bandwidth, computing power, and the algorithms. So it was just time. Hello?
Yeah, sorry guys.
There we go.
Oh my god. Sorry, I'm having functionality problems today, just myself. I'm not functioning well today. Yeah, Peter's got a question.
Today, Bitfury released a white paper on proof of stake versus proof of work. One of the conclusions there is that proof of stake coins are vulnerable for basically if you have people from the Genesis block. They have the ultimate say about the network because they can come together at any point in the future and rewrite the entire history because they can vote on Genesis block. Therefore, they can command what the history is if they decide to change it. Does your system address this problem? That if the people that started the block started with all the coins colluded to rewrite the entire history, would they be able to?
So this is the so-called nothing at stake attack. And so the idea of security deposits and slashing is supposed to solve this, but it really only works in the short term. But we can make the short term some reasonable length of time, like a few months, and simply reject any changes that go back longer than that. So that anyone who's online, if someone is trying to fork the blockchain up to a few months back, it's not going to work and they're going to get slashed. If the people from the Genesis block, or very early on in history, come around and try and start publishing a new chain, the current set of validators is going to be like, okay, these guys are crazy, we're not going to accept them. And so the validator network itself will be able to handle this. The question is, okay, well, what about the clients, the light clients, the people that aren't validating the whole chain? And so the difference between the Bitcoin security model and the Tendermint security model is that we expect you to at least once authenticate a hash from the chain out of band, whether it's asking your friend or going to a local convenience store, making some kind of economic transaction that allows you to verify that a particular hash is actually the hash on the current chain that everyone is currently using. And then so long as you're on at least once every couple of months, if the guys from the Genesis block come out and try and submit a new chain, you're going to know that it's crap and that you shouldn't go with it because it obviously came from further back and it's not the real thing. So it's a slightly different trust model than Bitcoin, because in Bitcoin, besides authenticating the Genesis block itself, all you do is just follow the most proof of work, right? Whereas here we expect you to engage with society in a way that sort of invokes your trust relationships and what you consider real and truth to find out something, what's a recent hack. And maybe there are vulnerabilities in that, but there are the same kind of social engineering vulnerabilities in Bitcoin, given the centralization of, say, Bitcoin's development ecosystem and of its mining ecosystem, etc. So it's a trade-off that allows us to be much more efficient, and we feel not actually give up very much in the form of security. While obviously Bitcoiners are going to tell you, well, change the game completely, you're sacrificing all the security. I think at the end of the day, the sort of Bitcoin idealism doesn't really map into the real world in terms of, there are software bugs, mining is highly centralized, development is highly centralized, and so on. So by being willing to accept that in the design of our algorithm, we can be much more efficient. Yes, we don't have a sort of universal proof of work standard on which we can go back and check the whole thing. We sort of rely on the fact that people were online witnessing history as it happened, which is kind of a foreign concept in Bitcoin land, but which we feel is probably very important moving forward with blockchains in general.
Right, and the mechanism that allows this time where clients can sync with the validator set is the unbonding period. So when a validator posts collateral, on the blockchain, they can't get their collateral right back out. Right? They can't spend that collateral. Even after they unbond and become, not validators, they still have to wait a period of time, and that's what we call the unbonding period. Let's say that period is a month, right? Then, if a client, as long as the client syncs with the network every month, they can be sure that they're going to get the correct updated validator set. If that's not the case, and a client gets, say, duped by a double spend attack, then the client has evidence that validators that are still active today, that still have collateral bonded today, had caused a double spend, and that means that the collateral will get slashed.
Another question.
So to answer your question, yes, Tendermint deals with that problem.
When two validators disagree about the order of a transaction, process of picking a winner, like how does that go down?
Great question. It's very simple, actually. So at every height, there's a round robin that determines who gets to propose the next block. So we're still doing blocks at a time, and a block has a set of transactions, and whoever is the agreed upon proposer gets to choose the ordering of transactions. And if someone else has a problem with that, then they won't sign off on that block. But presumably they'll consider it to be okay.
What's the actual block reward like? Is it just like typical?
It's just transaction. So there's no inflation in the system.
Yeah.
What's that?
There could be inflationary rewards, but it hasn't been programmed in. It would be easy to program that in, but the way we designed it, we just haven't done it. It really depends on what the initial distribution mechanism is. So when you launch a new cryptocurrency blockchain, if you want it to start with no coins, and you want I don't know, if you want to have a huge, I don't know, it depends on the distribution strategy. So you may or may not want inflationary rewards.
Oh, do we have feedback happening in your headphones, guys?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. I'll mute when we're not talking.
Cool.
Carry on. Sorry, guys. I guess you answered the question. Okay. So,
I don't know. It's just so there is no block reward for the Tendermint chain, it's more about the disincentive. Is that the idea?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So like Jay was saying, there could be inflation if you wanted it. We don't really see the need right now. We're basically assuming there is some other distribution mechanism in place, or in the case of, say, a private coalition of businesses that want to use a blockchain as a sort of standardized shared database between themselves, some legal contracts or legal agreements in place that bind whatever fiat currency they want or whatever real assets they want to the events on the blockchain, such that if you got slashed on the blockchain, you would lose the funds in real life, and there would be some legal agreement to bind you to that. And we haven't seen that in action yet. We're working on that kind of a thing. I think it will be really cool when we get there. But yeah, that's sort of, that's one approach. Another is you could use crowd sales. Another one is you can provide services on top of the core chain itself and charge for those services, and have the people that are doing that sort of hold on to the money, and the validators sort of reinvest the money into the system and provide more and more services. And then if people want to get in on that, if people want to become part of this network of service providers, they would have to buy some coin, and they'd have to buy it from the validators, and then the coin would have taken on some kind of price. So there are various ways to sort of build up equity, or I shouldn't call it equity, but build up sort of a market cap within the system without having to use inflation and having it sort of be tied to the price of wasted electricity, because here we're not trying to waste electricity.
But if you wanted to waste electricity, you could also use proof of work as a distribution meximism.
Yeah, of course.
You can reward people for wasting electricity, just as it is in Bitcoin. Except if you do this on Tendermint, the wasted electricity would not be responsible for consensus or security.
Right.
Because it's based on collateral, the security model will be different. Probably, potentially, the security would be better, and you would still have a proof of work distribution mechanism. But we are developing Tendermint because we love the environment and we don't want to destroy it, so we're not going to do that.
Interesting. Very interesting. Okay.
So, go ahead.
That's good.
So you say it solves the forking problem. Do you believe that this is a superior consensus mechanism in general than Bitcoin?
Yeah. Are you kidding? yeah. Bitcoin is like a default, trivial, no brains consensus mechanism. No one has to do anything. It's just like brute force, spit out work, and whichever thing has the most work, you go to that, and there's nothing else to it. Tendermint is much more subtle, much more nuanced. There's much more of a dance going on between the people that are validating. They're proposing, and they're saying, hey, everyone, check this out. This is what I think we should do next. And everyone gets back to him and says, hey, that's a good idea. And then they all say, hey, yeah, let's actually go and commit this. And then it becomes a new block on the chain. So it's much more involved from the participants. And then, of course, there's much more at stake if you invoke the economics of the matter. So overall, it's a far superior consensus algorithm. Hands down. It's definitely harder to implement. Maybe it's harder to understand. Bitcoin is really good as an educational tool. But otherwise, yeah, proof of work invokes all kinds of, Ethereum spent a ton of time, working to have an ASIC resistant proof of work algorithm, and then to have an algorithm that could do fast block times, but that wouldn't incentivize centralization of pooling, or centralization of mining into mining pools, right? That's a huge problem for proof of work, the issue of blocks getting bigger and having mining and mining pools and small miners who basically get completely shut out of the market, right? And so Ethereum tried to engineer a system to avoid those kinds of problems, and more or less didn't. There are now huge GPU farms of people mining Ethereum, and there's a massive Ethereum pool. I mean, one of them got to like 40% before they had to close the doors and be like, okay, we can't accept any more people because we're too big, despite all this engineering effort. So to do away with a lot of that with just a superior consensus algorithm, I think is really a great thing. Now, that being said, I should bring up, so we were at Scaling Bitcoin recently, and a couple of the guys from Cornell University put forward a proposal for a superior Bitcoin, and its consensus algorithm is actually way better than Bitcoin's. It doesn't change very much. Basically what it does is instead of putting the transactions in the block, you find a block first, and then you get to add a bunch of transactions until the next person finds the next block. And so it solves all kinds of problems with like the fairness of mining, whether you're a big miner or a small miner, because you don't have to propagate these big blocks right away to figure out who won this little consensus lottery. And so that's, I mean, if Bitcoin would adopt that, Bitcoin would be, way better. But Bitcoin has this other problem where it's sort of unwilling to evolve because, $4 billion on the line, and we have to get everyone to update. And yeah, so that'd be great though. I mean, if someone wanted to put out a proof of work chain that used these guys' algorithm, they call it Bitcoin NG, Bitcoin Next Generation. Even though I'm not a big fan of proof of work, I mean, I'd support that thing. It's great.
Okay, so we've taken out proof of work. What about like what BitShares uses is a delegated proof of stake? Is there any room for that in all this?
Sure. I think this gives you more of a spectrum and more sort of flexibility on the meaning of delegation. So I don't understand really all the mechanics of the BitShares system. I think there's some kind of like voting protocol such that a few people get voted to be the committers. I don't know if they have something at stake where they can get slashed and so on. Jay, do you know?
Last time I read, there's a fee to apply in the list to become a delegate.
Okay. And then I guess your punishment is just not being a delegate anymore. If you mess around, everyone will just vote you out and shame you. So, and presumably you're a public figure, right? So sort of on maybe BitShares is like an extreme end on the Tendermint spectrum, an extreme end of like identifiability and sort of reputation and social control over the validator set. But
you can still delegate in Tendermint. So we haven't implemented this yet, but it wouldn't be difficult. Anybody with an account with coins could, for example, just bond the coins with a validator and say, here, I won't do any validation, but I trust you, so take my money, your voting power goes up, and I'll earn a portion of your fees. So Tendermint could be compatible with delegation.
Yeah, for sure. So that's reasonable too, but there's more trust involved in the delegated stake model, and you don't really have any flexibility over how much trust. Whereas Tendermint's aiming to sort of let you range a little freer over that trust spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk more about how it lets you range over that and kind of the ability of experimenting with the Tendermint chain and kind of what your options are and how to go about playing with the options, I guess.
Yeah, sure. So like, the simplest thing to do if you just want a local Tendermint chain so that you can like play around with transactions, and we added support for the Ethereum virtual machine so you could deploy like Solidity contracts and so on. Excuse me. Basically what you would do is you'd compose a Genesis file, you'd create a key, and then you'd compose a Genesis file that has your public key as one of the validators, right? And by default, you're able to do all the normal things on a blockchain. You give yourself some coins in the Genesis file, and you can send transactions and so on. So that's the simple case. But say you wanted to set something up where only a few selected people are allowed to actually be validators and be committing blocks on the chain, and maybe you only want a different set of people to be able to deploy contracts on the chain, and then you want sort of everyone to be able to talk to those contracts, and maybe a different set of people, or there's a select group that are also allowed to be validators, but they're not currently validators yet. You can set all those individual permissions so that any sort of action that can be taken by a user on a chain can be permissioned right from the Genesis block. So if you wanted to set that up in the Genesis file, you'd set up your 3 validators, and then you would give them the permission to become validators, and then anyone else, you'd give a list of accounts of people that should have coins, and you'd set the permissions for those different accounts. So, the accounts that maybe these are like the developers or the IT team of the company or whatever, they would have permission to deploy contracts. That's the sort of create contract permission. And maybe you have an HR department, and you give the people there the create account permission. But you don't need maybe you don't want your HR department creating contracts, right? That's only for the developers, so you don't give them the create contract permission. And so in the end, you can sort of have relatively really fine-grained control over the capabilities of the individual users on the system. And we sort of have a more extensible framework so that you can start to program in your smart contracts even more permissions and have those permissions be stored in the accounts for sort of quick and fast access rather than have them be deep sort of in the logic of the smart contract. And so that it's also easy to read out just by looking at an individual's accounts, what permissions they have. Yeah. Does that sort of get at...
Yeah, that was good.
Do you have any comments on the Volkswagen scandal of...
Oh, I love this. Oh, yeah. So, I mean, this is great. I'm hoping that the result, that this is just the beginning of, like, massive corporate fuck-ups on account of their proprietary software. So there was an article that I thought was a wonderful article that opened with the idea that would you use an elevator if the people who owned the building weren't allowed to inspect the elevator, right? And you'd have to be out of your mind to do that because that elevator is almost certainly unsafe. But and unless there's some massive reputation on the line, but even still, even with the massive reputation on the line, if the owners of the building can't get in, then how are you going to know? One day maybe the elevator is going to kill you, and then that's that, right? So whenever you use proprietary software, it's similar to trusting an elevator that no one can inspect, especially not the owner of the building that the elevator is in. And as software continues to manage and automate so ever much more of our lives, this issue is becoming a massive social liability that people aren't really aware of, but is going to start to play out in these scandals where some honest team of researchers was just doing some crazy science for fun, testing out their Volkswagen emissions for whatever, and boom, the whole thing comes unraveling. So I think it's great for open source and for the image of open source, and open source is doing really good these days, and of course blockchains are sort of square right in the middle of that. And sort of the interesting thing about blockchains is they besides the sort of classic open source business models, which are difficult really to get right, and only so many companies have actually pulled it off, and a lot of people say it's actually impossible. Blockchains sort of start to provide the notion of open source software, starting to pay for itself and creating sort of economic conditions in which the developers of that software can actually get paid to continue to develop that. And we're sort of starting to see that among blockchains a little bit. Hopefully it'll continue to spread. It's still difficult because blockchains are so new, and the on and off ramps to fiat currencies are so tedious. But as things start to ease, and as more and more banks start using blockchains, I think open source is going to get a major boon from the ability of these projects to sort of self-fund themselves and more easily raise funds for themselves, and kick-started crowd-funded campaigns where you don't have to pay 5% to central parties and so on. So yeah, I think Volkswagen is just another step along this long path towards a more open source culture.
How do you guys both know each other, and what brought you guys together on this project? Were you just sitting around having a beer one day and...
No, I wish I knew Jay for longer.
Yeah, we met in San Francisco. Was that the first time you had heard about Tendermint?
No, I heard about Tendermint. Was it a podcast you did with Brian Crane? On Epicenter or something?
Adam Levine. Let's Talk Bitcoin.
Was it on Let's Talk Bitcoin?
Yeah.
Right, okay. I thought it was someone else, though. But anyways, yeah, I listened to a podcast. I was like, this is Consensus Without Mining was the title. It was like a proof of stake. I had known about slasher and sort of the proof of stake with something at stake algorithm since Vitalik had written about it in early 2014. And then I heard about that, and I was like, hey, it sounds like this is the first implementation. Like, this Jae guy sounds pretty cool. And then we met on a Slack, on the CCRG Slack. So there was like a cryptocurrency research group sort of pioneered or led by Ethereum, by Vitalik and Vlad of the Ethereum research team. And so we met on there, and then at Crypto Economicon back in January in San Francisco or in Palo Alto was the first time we actually met. And then I spent a couple months with Jay working on this stuff, and now we're regular collaborators. Yeah.
And Jay, are you in San Fran, or are you in the Ontario region?
I'm in San Francisco in the Mission.
Crazy. Sexy times.
Cool. I guess just to
What?
unless you guys have anything more to add, the last thing I'd be interested in hearing is, well, one thing we've been talking a lot about here the past couple of weeks is kind of the wider context of proof of stake. And you and I have talked about like city councilors having something at stake, or politicians having something at stake,
Sure.
and these different ideas. So maybe you can elaborate on that and your ideas on there.
Sure, yeah. I recently became an official candidate for the Canadian federal election, so this is my plug. If you live in Eglinton, Lawrence, and Toronto. But yeah, politics is a mess. I'm running to sort of help exemplify the joke that it is, and a lot of it, I would really argue, is that it's not nearly decentralized enough. It becomes sort of an information theoretical problem for a highly centralized federal government to have enough bandwidth to handle all the information they need to handle to actually make informed decisions that are going to affect people, you know, in cities and in communities all across the country. So I think that notion is kind of crazy. And what I'm excited about is the sort of decentralization of governments and sort of a return to a more sort of a city-state approach to global politics, and where cities are very much sort of like atomic units of like culture and socioeconomics, right? And there should definitely be governmental processes at a municipal level. And what I'm hoping to see is that cities will sort of start to take on proof-of-stake blockchains as sort of the cornerstone of their administrative and bureaucratic affairs, and that the people validating those chains and actually processing the transactions will be major figures in the community and in the city, whether it's city councilors, the mayor itself, major business holders, and so on. These are people that are actually going to have something at stake. Probably, I'm not expecting the Canadian dollar to go anywhere soon, though it is tanking and continues to. It'll probably stick around. People are going to continue denominating their assets in Canadian dollars, but as the banks continue to come on board the blockchain space, I think it'll be reasonable to expect sort of legal agreements enforcing, like we were saying earlier, things happening on the chain actually, happening in real life, so that if one of these counselors or whoever is a validator ends up messing around trying to fork the chain, do whatever, and they lose their stake, and then that stake goes into the coffers of the city and can be used, to fund education, healthcare, roads, whatever the hell the city needs to do. So I think these kinds of technologies, all of this was really possible before, but no one sort of had the vision or the foresight to put all the pieces together to make it work. And now we're starting to see that. We're starting to see lots of startups try to offer products to make this possible. It's going to be a matter of getting the adoption. But once we start to get one city on these kinds of models, I think the benefits in terms of cost savings at a bureaucratic level are going to be massive. And the alignment of incentives of the bureaucrats with the actual city dwellers is going to lead just a better quality of life for everyone, because that's the way games play out. When the incentives are aligned, people do things that benefit each other. So yeah, it's still kind of a little bit of a heady thought, for sure. But I think we're moving in that direction, and maybe within the next couple of years, we could see some small city start to incorporate these kinds of economics and mechanics into city administration. And I think it'd be a really good thing.
So is that like kind of your motivation for doing all this, is so that it would change?
Yeah. Basically. Yeah, I want to decentralize all the things, right?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, right.
So I got a question about the scalability. People have been talking a lot about that with Bitcoin. How does Tendermint stack up?
Yeah, it's infinitely more scalable. Well, I shouldn't say infinitely, but it's much more scalable. Jay, you want to talk about this?
Sure. Yeah. The best way to scale something infinitely, because we can only go so much by making things faster, is to parallelize it. And for example, the simplest way with blockchains would be to just have multiple parallel blockchains that are independent or sovereign in scope. We can still have blockchains, different sovereign blockchains that are connected weakly, and in order to do this well, you need to have a protocol for verifying the consensus state of another blockchain. But that's pretty well defined and easy with Tendermint. Okay, so with Bitcoin, the problem is that unless you have merged mining, which is brittle or difficult, nobody's really figured out a good way or a system to have many blockchains that are all merged mined. Problem with mining is that it really makes the system want to have a single global big bad blockchain where all the mining is concentrated on a single blockchain. With proof of stake or with a Tendermint-like consensus where validators are pseudonymous and identified by public key, you can have as many blockchains as you want. You can have all kinds of models. You can have a single validator with the same public key validating on multiple blockchains, and you can have the rule for these blockchains be that if one validator does wrong on one blockchain, then everybody slashes them. And so you can have security that is transitive across these blockchains. Or you can have just independent blockchains with independent validators that don't share any security. There's a lot of play there, and there's a lot of room to explore. So with regards to how to scale it, it really depends on the application. So for example, a global monetary system, you might want to have one blockchain on top with all the major banks or actors who are moving and settling funds in a slow manner, with smaller blockchains that are right underneath it. Or you might want to just have a flat space with multiple blockchains with atomic cross-chain trading going on between them. It really depends on the application. But there's many ways to solve it. With Tendermint, you can have as many blockchains as you want, and there's no problem with security.
But what if one block becomes too popular and the block size isn't big enough? Is there a room in the protocol to increase the block size of a single chain on Tendermint?
Okay, well, I'll answer that, and then maybe Ethan can give a different answer if he disagrees. But the way I see that problem, like the block size problem, I think of it as a governance problem. So the way I think that should be solved is with a system of voting, and the voting system can be built into the blockchain. That's certainly possible. As you know who these validators are based on their public key, and in some situations you know exactly who they are because they're identified, they're publicly identified. There should be a governance system that is implemented where everybody can easily decide on these things. That's kind of how governments work, and that's what they're for, to make decisions about such things. And once a decision has been reached, all the validators in the network should follow the rules set forth by the governance system. So, just because I'm a validator and I disagree with the limit, doesn't mean that I should go ahead and reject blocks. The network will probably want to punish me for that. Instead, as a validator, I should vote in a system, and once an agreement has been reached, say, maybe they'll say, let's not increase the limit, or maybe they'll say, let's increase the limit on this date. Then all the validators, even me, even if I disagree, should just follow the law or the rules set forth.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Jacob.
Quick question. Sorry, I'm not seeing from here. Yeah, Jay. So in terms of, let's say, for example, we have a couple of blockchains, and how do we know if there's new ones out there that we want to, as you said, like merge mine, for example, or validate between each other? Well, how would you do that?
So presumably, like for a chain to know about another chain, really what we mean is that there's sort of some logic on the chain in the form of, say, a smart contract that runs the like client logic and is sent transactions that tell it about blocks and possibly transactions in another chain, right? So if you have chain A and it's aware of chain B, what that probably means is there's a special smart contract on chain A that runs the logic for processing blocks and transactions from chain B so that people can send blocks from chain B or block headers from chain B to chain A, and so that it can chain them all together, and basically just verify the signatures, and then it'd be able to publish proofs, or people would be able to check proofs from using transactions on chain B and the Merkle root that they trust on chain A, because they might not necessarily trust chain B because they haven't been on chain B, but chain A keeps a light client for chain B, and so you can trust that, and so you can prove that the state of accounts and so on. So to bring in another chain would just be a matter of starting creating a new smart contract that has the logic for that chain, and some set of nodes be willing to broadcast or so to speak relay the headers from that new chain onto ours.
And this method of chain A, the nodes, the validators in chain A, understanding the consensus new blocks from chain B is the same like client logic that say your mobile phone would use to validate transactions on the blockchain.
Right. And it's much nicer and simpler than Bitcoin's for a couple reasons. One, because of the proof of work. So in Bitcoin, for one chain, or to the light client protocol in Bitcoin, the first thing you have to do is find the longest chain. Whereas we really only have one chain, so long as you've authenticated some recent state, then you're on the right chain, and then you know exactly where you're going to be. You don't have to sort of try and find all the chains and compare and find the longest one. The other reason is because Tendermint, similar to Ethereum, actually keeps a Merkle root of the world state, in the header. Bitcoin doesn't do that. There's no sort of Bitcoin balance within the Bitcoin blockchain. You can't look up the balance of an account. It's actually not stored in the data structure that is the Bitcoin blockchain. Whereas for Tendermint or Ethereum, they have sort of this enhanced light client functionality where the current balance of an account can be found directly in the current block with a sort of using the Merkle hash of the state. Whereas in Bitcoin, you'd have to tally up all the transactions if you wanted to know the current state. So it makes it a lot easier.
Right. But let's say you have 1,000 blocks and each has an individual root. Your SPD client, let's assume each rule is about, maximum 500K kilobytes each. Well, okay, let's say 1 megabyte each, even though that's really pushing it.
Sorry, what are you saying? The blocks are 4 megabytes?
Okay, let's just assume we have each blockchain. Let's say how well does it scale? Like, if you have 1,000 you have 1,000 block chains,
sure.
And you have an SPD client that has to validate each chain kind of parallel.
Yeah. And
assuming that you have individual unique rules about 1 megabyte each, and that's kind of stretching it.
No. So you don't have to process the whole block, right? You only have to process the headers, and headers are only like a few hundred bytes. maybe a kilobyte, say.
I'm not talking about the headers. I'm talking about the rule, as you said.
He's not talking about the headers. He's just talking about the rule.
The rules
Oh, the rule.
Right, exactly.
Ah.
So, like, you have to think about that if each chain has its own set of conditions, these conditions have it's also data memory that has
of course.
into
Yeah. So in that say we were using the Ethereum virtual machine to program all of this in. That would be one way of allowing it to happen sort of on the fly, so you could add in a new chain just by creating a new Ethereum contract. I don't know how big these things would actually be. I don't think they'd be too big. I mean, it's basically just excuse me, sorry. It's basically just signature checks and like some Merkle hashing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it.
Yeah, and when the validator set changes.
Stuff, but... Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, when the validator set changes, occasionally you'll also need to have a data structure that shows how the validator set changed. But it doesn't have to be for every block. It doesn't have to be for every validator set change either.
Right.
That's a bit complicated. We don't have to talk about that too much right now. But the SPV validation is very cheap. You don't have to download all the headers or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is, and this goes back to sort of the talk about cities and municipalities and sort of building up these networks across the globe, starting from cities, is there's going to be sort of a natural tree-like hierarchical structure that's going to connect cities to each other and those groups to other neighboring groups of cities and so on up to countries and to the rest of the world, so that you wouldn't necessarily need to be aware of 1,000 other chains. You'll need to be aware of some chains nearby, some of your favorite whatever, Toronto will be aware of like Waterloo and Montreal and maybe Vancouver, and then like some larger chains, say for Canada, for all the cities in Canada, if we wanted to maintain that nationality, and through that it'd be able to make transactions sort of across. Now, we haven't really worked out all the details of these sort of like cross chains, but presumably, or sort of long distance hopping across chains with transactions. I think most of the technology is there. It's just a matter of like structuring the network so that you have enough connections to a chain, to one of these bigger chains that you could get across, say to send a transaction to China or something like this. But presumably most of the economic activity is local. And if you can make assumptions like that, then you can have most of your connectivity be to local regions, and then only a few links to sort of more global or distant regions.
Mm-hmm. And all of that is just a way to have transactions where the total number of coins across all of these chains is invariant. If you just want to have like blockchains with their own currency, you don't. Another way to do it is with atomic cross-chain swaps. So you can have, for example, a California coin and a Vancouver coin, and you can still move value across these chains with a special kind of transaction called an atomic cross swap trade. It doesn't require any communication between these blockchain networks at all. It just uses a hash lock system.
So Jacob was asking, 1 peg or 2 pegs?
Is this a 2 peg or is this a completely different thing?
It's like a pegging thing?
No. This is so. What Ethan was talking about was like a.
Wait.
Huh?
Hey, is this a pegging thing? Yeah. Okay. So anyway. Sorry guys. No, it's just this was make them laugh.
Yeah.
Okay.
You have a question?
I just had a general question about Tendermint and the kind of status and the size of the ecosystem. How many people are contributing? Is anyone running this in production that we know of? What's the kind of status there? Is it alpha, beta? What's going on with that?
Sure.
Beta is English for beta.
It's sorry, there's feedback here. It's alpha software that's just about to become beta software. I wouldn't put any monetary trades on it because there needs to be more vetting, right? One way to make such a like Tendermint more robust is to actually launch a blockchain and use it for value. Then everybody would want to make it secure. But we're not focusing on that right now. We're focusing on attracting clients and building with them for their particular vertical. So it's not production. It's I would call it beta. What was the other question? Was there more to that? Oh, and how many contributors there are? Yeah, there's two main contributors. It's me and Ethan. Ethan's doing more with the contributions now these days. But it's two of us, and it's also two companies. It's Eris and Tendermint, two separate entities where Ethan is in both. And Tendermint is a new company, and it's got its own team members, and we're raising funds, and all of that's happening. Maybe at the Eris side, there's more people working on Tendermint through the EVM, testing things like that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think Eris is currently like the main consumer of the Tendermint software and has been sort of a vendor of it as well, and sort of bringing in clients in the banking world and elsewhere, insurance and so on, auditing, whatever. A lot of the interest is in smart contracts, and a lot of that is written in the Ethereum virtual machine, but there's also, of course, interest in the sort of permissioning layer, using it as like an operating system for business accounting and, like we were talking before, administration, bureaucratic things. So Eris does have a bunch of clients. I'm not really supposed to speak of who. You can bug Preston about that if you want to know more about marmots or something.
Yeah, we want to know more about marmots.
That's basically all he's going to tell you about. So.
I'm not even sure what a marmot is around here.
Yeah.
Marsupial of some sort. So Jacob has a question for you again.
Sure.
In terms of going back quickly to the cross-chain, because there's been a lot of people talking about this for about 6 months, half a year ago. Have you guys thought of or stumbled upon, like, if assuming you have a cross-chain interaction or multiple chains, this is assuming what the wider assumption here is that these are synchronous timing. This is synchronous lock times. So, have you worked on asynchronous timing? So we have chains that have faster validation times, or have faster or output more blocks than one chain, for example. How do you manage that? So basically, like, or do you just state, just like how you discussed on having a mutual sized block and having a mutually sized validation time?
So
sorry.
For the atomic swap portion, atomic swap is very clever in its construction and is quite agnostic to the actual rules of the chain. So the hash locking mechanism is what makes it work, and then you can just, the rest of the logic can be specific to the particular chain. The only other thing you need is that both participants, you have like a multi-sig thing. So as long as both participants have a key and can sign for the different chains, it'll work out. And you can set the time locks, the sort of timeouts, so that people can get their money back if the other participant disappears. Presumably that's what you were talking about. You can set those to be in the particular parlance of the given chain. So on one chain it might be 100 blocks, on another it might be 5 or whatever, depending on the times. So atomic swap is quite agnostic to the actual specifics of the individual chains you're swapping between. Of course, if it was an SPV type of thing and you were more aware of the chain, then yeah, definitely the logic of the SPV. Ideally all the chains would be the same kind of foundation. They might all be a Tendermint chain, in which case they'd all be parameterized the same way. So there's some set of parameters every instance of an SPV contract will take as sort of initialization the parameters of the chain it's supposed to be talking to, and that'll account for the different block times and so on. Other than that, you might have other base templates, maybe for an Ethereum chain, maybe for an NXT chain, maybe for a Bitcoin chain. But enumerating all of those is definitely non-trivial work. It requires someone to write a smart contract specific to the SPV requirements or the light client requirements of the given chain you're trying to be aware of.
So you're saying these atomic transactions or atomic
Atomic swap.
hash lots, right?
Yep.
So they're time independent. This is what you're saying. Or are they time?
They're not. There's a timeout period. Basically, to sort of try to communicate the basic intuition. The feedback is terrible. Can you mute it?
Yes, sorry, guys. So
Oh, this is much better. Wow. Hey, sorry.
Hey, we can talk.
Hey. Yeah, so to try and communicate the basic intuition, so on one of the chains, someone will say either this transaction can be spent by me in 100 blocks, or it can be spent by someone who knows the preimage to this hash, right? And so I'll take some secret, I'll hash it, and whoever knows the secret can spend it within, say, 2 days or something. And then I'll get the other guy to sign off on that, and so I'll have the multi-sig so that I can, if 2 days go by or 100 blocks or whatever I said, I can get my money back. And then for him to be for the other guy to be able to claim my funds, I have to reveal the secret to him. But before I'm going to do that, I'm going to make him create a transaction on his chain that will send me funds, hash locked with the same secret. He doesn't know that secret. All he knows is the hash. And then also I'll sign off saying, okay, he can have it back in 50 days or 10 days or whatever it is for him. And then as soon as I reveal the hash, he can claim mine and I can claim his. And if I don't reveal the hash in time, then we'll both just claim our transactions back. So there's both hash locking and sort of time locking, and then there's also the digital signature element. So it combines all three in a very clever construction. That ends up being very much chain agnostic. So you could atomic swap basically between any two chains.
totally cool.
Deep.
Very deep. Super deep, dude.
Yeah, it's deep. So the deep thing is the connection between atomic swaps and sort of like things like the Lightning Network and payment channels. Basically, an atomic swap is like a completely symmetric two-way payment channel. But you can have sort of asymmetric one-way payment channels, and when you do that, you end up with basically what people call the Lightning Network, which is like a vast web of hash-locked and time-locked and digitally signed swaps that sort of allow value to move around in many directions without talking to a blockchain at all, and that becomes immensely powerful, and there's huge buzz around the Lightning Network, which of course is way easier to implement with something like Tendermint than with Bitcoin.
Cool.
Totally see how you guys are roommates.
Yeah, thanks,
No?
guys. Any more questions?
I'm pretty happy.
It was good.
That's it's been almost an hour, right?
It's been an hour, yeah.
Yeah, it's been over an hour.
Over an hour. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. I really enjoyed that. I think it's really kind of trippy.
Yeah.
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 Okay, cool.
You're on the bleeding edge of everything. Like this is, the next level of crypto, I guess.
Some next level shit, man.
Sure, yeah.
You guys are like forging it.
Hey guys, you guys should join the project and help out. You guys can join the bleeding edge with us.
Yeah.
How much are you paying?
Yeah, come on board.
Peter's all.
Later.
I
might join. I might join the gang.
Yeah, one thing that we can do is one thing we should do is gather people who want to be Tendermint validators for something like a name coin, right? So whether it's a name coin system or a identity registration system, we're going to need validators, and we're going to want it to be community members in addition to maybe the Tendermint organization itself and others. So if you guys want to help create that community, you should join our Slack. And the way to join our Slack is to email us at hello@tendermint.com, and we should start the communication from there.
That sounds pretty freaking
And,
cool.
and there's a testnet too, right? And you can get testnet coins, I think.
Yeah, there's an
Oh
open.
yeah, there is a testnet. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, there's an open GitHub issue, and if you look in the Tendermint repo in the issues, you can post an address, and then you can get included in the next instance of the testnet, so that you'll have coins and can send transactions, make contracts, and so on.
Sweet.
I have one more question.
Jesse, make it quick.
Yeah.
I want spaghetti.
Do either of you program your open source code on this website? I forget the name, livecoding.tv or something, and people can just watch you program?
That's awesome and scary.
That sounds boring.
I haven't done it myself. That sounds.
It sounds like that sounds like really exciting TV, right? Like this. Okay, wait, we got some real suspenseful code coming on now, guys. Really like dark music, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, no, that'd be fun. I should check that out. Yeah.
What's it called again?
I forget the name. The guy
Live
from
coding?
Scenario was doing it.
Oh, the guy from Scenario invented it.
Yeah, he's been starting-
Livecoding.tv. Cool.
Live type, guys, live type.
It's like
All right,
pair
well-
programming, yeah, without the pair.
Sounds like a really good time to me.
Yep.
Mm.
That's like sarcastic.
Well, because you don't code yet, buddy.
I don't code. Yeah, it's true.
Stream it and watch
Yeah,
you code.
streaming code, live type, live all day long.
Central Vancouver, coding.
Sponsored by, yeah, seriously. Hire a guy in China to write all over the wall. Or I mean, we could do it like also. Sublime could sponsor it. Okay, so
Yeah.
we've had a really good night tonight, fellas. I just want to say thank you, Jay, so much. It's very kind of you to find the time, and Ethan, of course, thank you very much for finding the time as well. I can totally see how you and Zach are like best bros. It's like it's like you guys are. Yeah, right? You guys are like totally from the same tree. It's so interesting. So yeah, thanks a lot, guys, and we'll check in in a few months. All right?
Cool.
Thanks, guys. It's been a blast.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Ethan.
See ya. See you next time.
Until next time. Over and out.
All right.
Yep. Bye-bye. Bye. And